Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Veterinary Business Podcast, your ultimate resource for developing a successful veterinary practice and career. I am Naren Arul Raja, the founder of the Veterinary Business Podcast and one of the co-hosts. On this podcast, we bring you insights and expertise from industry-leading doctors, experts, and thought leaders. We cover a wide range of topics, including practice management, marketing strategies, leadership development, HR best practices, and more. Whether you are a practicing veterinarian, a practice owner, practice manager, or a student studying to be a veterinarian, this podcast is tailored to help you navigate the unique challenges and opportunities in the business of veterinary medicine. And remember, every listener of this podcast is welcome to visit veterinarybusinessinstitute.com for additional resources and tools to support your growth. And remember, you can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, YouTube Music, Spotify, and other popular podcast platforms. Today, I'm excited to talk to Stephen McClory. He's the co-founder and CEO of Vet Badger, and he's also a practice manager. He manages the practice that was created by his wife. I'll let him talk about both. Our topic today is prioritizing relationships in veterinary medicine. Before we get started, Stephen, why don't you take a minute to tell us a bit about yourself, your practice that you manage, and your story as to why and how you ended up starting this software company?
Yeah, of course. So, I'm excited to be here. So my story, I guess, starts when I was in graduate school. I was a computer science researcher, working in distributed systems and all sort of very technical stuff. And I met a woman, we got married, and she immediately started vet school. And so that was the beginning. And so she graduated from vet school about a little over 20 years ago now. She spent the first 10 years or so of her career working for other clinics. So she worked for a small private clinic, then she worked for a corporate clinic. Then she went back to another small private clinic. And then about 10 years ago, we bought our own practice. And right around that time, just before that, when she'd been working at the corporate clinic, she'd started having conversations with me about the software that she was using and the struggles that she was having with some specific aspects of it. So the main thing at the beginning of these conversations, she was asking me why it was so difficult for her to communicate her client report at the end of an exam. So, for example, client comes in with a dog, she does some tests, she has these sort of very technical conversations with the client, but the eyes kind of glaze over, and you can kind of tell that the client doesn't really understand. And she always believed that it was very important that at least by the end of the day, that client should have a solid understanding of what's really happened in the vet clinic today, right? What is wrong with my dog? Why did you run these tests? Why did I spend all this money? And clients who don't have that understanding probably aren't going to come back. They're probably not going to take your medical advice. And so she understood this very early on. And it's funny because for me, as a computer science researcher, one of the underlying principles of computer architecture and sort of network design is that the sender is responsible for the correct receipt of a message. So when you're designing a network protocol, you build it so that the computer that's creating the message and sending it is responsible for the receiving computer correctly understanding it. And if you think about that as sort of a philosophical point, if I send some information to a client and it's just a bunch of technical mumbo jumbo that may make sense to me, but it doesn't make sense to the client, it's as if I never sent it. Right? There's no point in just overwhelming your client with a bunch of medical jargon if they don't really understand. And this is where these sort of relationships and the ability to understand your client and the ability to communicate with your client is a fundamental part of veterinary medicine. And when she first started talking to me about this, I didn't really understand all the pieces of it at the time, but she was just having this very technical question of like, how can I send these messages? How can I get my clients to understand this? And so this all sort of happened around the same time that we were looking into buying our own practice. And I was looking into building some new software for her. And as things evolved, we ended up building a complete practice management system that was designed sort of from the ground up to support this situation and to solve these problems for her. That was how I got started in the role of veterinary medicine. And then the longer that we owned the practice, the more, things change in small businesses. And right now I am the practice manager. That wasn't my role originally, but I've now taken over that role as practice manager. And so I am sort of day to day. Actually, this afternoon, when we're done here, I'm going to go in and I will be the receptionist this afternoon because our receptionist has to be out this afternoon. So I do spend a lot of time in the clinic, talking to clients, working with the team, and kind of getting a feeling for how this, partly obviously how our software works in the practice, but also trying to keep the practice going.
Yeah, this is awesome. I mean, I was just thinking about what you said, and I think your wife was on to something here. Like, I study influence and marketing, and I've written like hundreds of articles and half a dozen books on marketing. And one of the keys to get people to do anything is to get them committed. And it's very hard to commit to something. I mean, I'm putting myself as the client, right? The pet owner. Very hard to commit to something or believe something is good for me till I understand it. I mean, classic example, you go to a car dealership, a guy goes $3,000. If you don't understand what's going on and why that's happening and how this is going to be good for me for the next 5 years, I feel like he's scamming me and he's kind of putting a gun to my head because I don't have a choice. And the minute we feel somebody did that to us, we are not going back, like you clearly said, right? We're always finding a reason to not do the things and ignore things or find somebody else we have that relationship with us. The good news, bad news story. Unfortunately, most practice owners haven't figured out what your wife figured out, which is you have to explain to people. I mean, you get a $300 bill. Why is that $300 bill? What are the tests I ran and why did I run it? It sounds so basic, and explaining it from the perspective of the client who's like, who loves the pet. This is why I ran it. This is why it's good for your pet. This is why you as an owner, would appreciate it, right? But if you don't explain it, I assumed just trying to scam me or trying to take advantage of me, the fact that I don't know anything. But that's how most of us feel, unfortunately, at the end of most vet visits. I mean, I have a pet and we had an emergency and we had to run through 7 different people and, not 7, I'm exaggerating, but 3 different people. And you just felt like you were taken advantage of. Like, you didn't know what was going on. You didn't know why it was going on. Just felt, well, $3,000 later, 2 days later, and a lot of pain and suffering. I don't know, they did something. So yeah, I'm grateful for that, but I don't know if it's really worth $3,000 or whether it's just, I was taken advantage of, you know what I mean? In a vulnerable situation. And you don't want to feel like that. You don't want your customers to feel like that. So I'm glad your software is, focused on that. Kudos to your wife for figuring that out really fast. That was amazing. So let's switch gears a little bit. Tell us about the role you see relationship management playing in the veterinary field. I know we started talking about it. And first, you talked about the need to help people understand, right? Before they listen to you, take your advice, do the things you want, they have to understand you. Now, let's switch gears. Now, how does helping somebody understand is different from relationships? And why are relationships important?
So I think what we were just saying about your feelings as a customer, as a client, of that sort of series of sort of transactional relationships, right? So you interacted with 3 different people. You didn't really know them, but it was an emergency situation. And so that's very common. That's the way that often happens. But the other side of that relationship is that as a veterinarian, so my wife was going through vet school. We were just married. We were newlyweds. We were actually in Dublin, Ireland. And so we were the only married couple in her class. And so our house ended up sort of being the place that all the American students kind of hung out. So I got to know a lot of vet students. And one of the things that, I think everybody knows this, but it becomes very clear. The more veterinarians you know, the clearer this becomes. Nobody gets into this field to make money.
Yes.
Right? Everyone who gets through vet school does it through the motivation of love for animals, right? Everyone who talks about, little kids say, I love animals, I want to be a vet. And that's just a common theme all the way through the whole profession. And the thing that's often left out of that is that these are people who are very smart. It's an incredibly difficult school to get into, and it's incredibly difficult to graduate. It's a very challenging career. None of the training, none of the, even really the personality traits of the people who go through this are really tuned towards working really well with people, right? Vets don't get into this field. First of all, they don't get into it because they want to make money. They also don't really get into it because they really like working with people. They really like working with animals. And then they come out and they discover, well, in order to work with animals, I'm going to have to interact with a lot of people, some of whom feel as though I'm taking advantage of them.
Right.
Because you're constantly interacting. I think that's, one of the reasons that we have such a problem with burnout in this industry is that there's often this sort of emotional mismatch between these people who are in the clients who are often in very high stress situations. They have this pet that they love and they don't really understand what's going on with it. And as a vet, again, it comes back to the ability to communicate and to empathize and to sort of maintain that relationship, build a relationship very quickly sometimes, especially if you're in emergency situations. It's not just communication. It's actually, it's empathy. It's building that relationship so that you can understand what message you can provide to your client that they will understand. Because if they don't trust you, and there's research to back this up, if your client has a trusting relationship with you, they are something like 80% more likely to take your medical advice. And you can imagine increasing the probability of your client taking your medical advice greatly improves the medical outcomes of your patients. And so it's just better medicine. Like, your patients will be healthier if your clients have a stronger relationship with you and if they feel that there's this sort of open channel of communication with them.
No, absolutely. I'm just brain is working as you're speaking. Like, I was just thinking about the relationship we had with our vet. I mean, it's not great. I'm being honest, right? We have a regular vet. Again, it's very transactional. There's no relationship. You go there, okay, no hello, no hey, how is going? They don't know anything about us. They don't know anything about our pet. There's none of that stuff. Of course, just transaction, get it done. Always feel like you're being taken advantage of because you don't understand what's going on or what the value of it is. And then when an emergency happens, it's 3x that, right? It just goes to a different level. First, the way it typically happens is nobody tells you they can't help you, so we're just wasting our time. And then finally, nobody, like, you don't even know who to go. So you go here, you go there, finally, like, you find somebody who finds a breakthrough and, solves it. But again, even they're focused on the pet. They're not focused on the pet owner.
Yeah.
The pet owner's experience is horrible. I mean, we have had situations where our pup would, have some grapes or whatever, and then we are like rushing him. And in the minus 20 degrees weather, we are sitting out in the car for 3 hours till they're ready to take the pup in. I mean, they don't think about those humans behind the pets, and it's just almost like that brain is kind of turned off. And I'm just, kind of, so I guess let me kind of expand on that and, ask you to share some examples. So what are some of the common issues you see vets struggling with when it comes to relationship management? Where does this come from? Like, and why are they struggling with this? And like you said, the people who, like, I have a niece right now, she wants to be a vet. She's 9 years old. I'm not sure if she's going to be, but that's what she tells everybody. She wants to be a vet. She loves the pets and, she loves animals. So, she's good with people too, but that's not what motivates her. So what are some of the challenges or issues or examples on the relationship side that you see?
Yeah. So I think there's that underlying sort of the tendency of people to be motivated, people in the industry tend to be motivated more by the love of pets. And so I think they're often taken by surprise when they encounter this problem of, having to either properly manage these relationships or just ignore these relationships and then not really understand the consequences both to their business and to their personal lives. It becomes really stressful as a vet to know that there's somebody sitting out in the parking lot for 3 hours. Like, they know that you're out there, but they don't feel that they can do anything about it because they're overwhelmed by everything else that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that makes it so overwhelming is that the more your clients expect this relationship to be sort of a close personal relationship, the more stressful it becomes on you, because it's an asymmetric relationship. If you think about it from as a pet owner, you have, you said you have one regular vet, right?
Yeah.
That regular vet has probably a couple thousand clients. And so each one of those clients thinks of that vet as their vet, but managing that relationship in the other direction is extremely difficult. Like, they're not going to be able to remember everybody's names. I call this the grocery store problem, because we live in Portland, Oregon. It's not a small town, but my wife still encounters this situation where she'll be buying groceries on Saturday afternoon, and someone will walk up to her and recognize her and say, "Hey, Dr. Alexandra." And my wife doesn't remember who these people are. She would probably remember their pet, but she doesn't remember everybody's faces.
Right.
But everybody remembers her. And so it's this sort of additional layer of stress where these people, you want people to have that personal relationship with you, because, as I said, there's this, there's research that shows that relationship produces better communication and produces better medical outcomes, and obviously produces better client retention. So it's good for your business, it's good for your medical practice, but it's extremely difficult to manage this without just making people think that, you don't care, you don't remember, you're just in it for the money. Whereas, of course, if you look at the financial side of it, very few of us are just in it for the money. There just isn't that much money in it.
Exactly.
It is for the love of the pets, but it's the challenge of managing these relationships sort of in these sort of bulk relationships almost. It makes it very difficult.
Absolutely. I'm just thinking out loud. While you were speaking, this example of like sitting in the cold minus 20 degrees weather for 3 hours. They could have said the minute we called, "Hey guys, it's a 3-hour wait. Tell us, this is our address. How far are you from our location?" Okay, 45 minutes. Why don't I let you know, an hour before you can come in, but do you want a spot? And absolutely, I want a spot. And oh, by the way, if you want to reserve your spot, it's going to cost you $50 because, we don't want that spot to be. Of course, take my $50. I want to keep that spot, right? Because my pet is important and there's an emergency right now, of course, and boom. Then I stay at home for 2 hours and I go. That's an pretty complex solution to implement. But this was just an emergency clinic where you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week type situation. So for them, maybe that's a smart way to keep lots of people very happy, right? So I can have my hot chocolate versus, stay freeze in the car for 3 hours. Standing outside their building. Anyways. And I agree. I feel like even compared to my dentist, the vets don't have as much relationships with the clients as, let's say, a dentist would have. Maybe because they just need to work on it. And is it partly the fault of the software? They don't really focus on relationships. Is that why, sometimes, like, if you don't have the hammer, we can't nail that nail in, right? Sometimes. So is that one of those issues where the technology and the tools surrounding vets are not helping them focus on the relationship?
I think that's a big part of it. Yeah, I think a big part of it is that, as I was saying, our software was designed with these ideas in mind from the beginning. A lot of the other sort of practice management systems weren't designed that way. There are other tools that let you send text messages and things like that. But the problem is, if you haven't thought of relationship management as one of your core principles when you're setting up your business and when you're making these decisions about which technologies are you going to use, how are you going to optimize the flow in your team's workflow, if you don't prioritize relationships while you're making those decisions and it ends up being an afterthought, then you end up with either, you buy a separate mobile phone that is the clinic phone number, and you just, you have one person sitting at a desk sending text messages with their thumbs. And all of those things, you start to break down the efficiency around that relationship management because it was an afterthought. And then you never really catch up. Whereas, at my wife's clinic, for example, during COVID, a lot of the other clinics in the area were really struggling with a lot of these same issues of, we don't have enough phone lines. We don't have the ability to send text messages. We don't have a video solution. Whereas at my wife's clinic, all of those things are built into the software, and it's the practice management software. So you're not sort of switching around between different softwares. So we had telemedicine visits, because again, it's built into the practice management software. Clients would come and park in the parking lot, and we just set up an outdoor Wi-Fi network for them. They would log into the clinic's Wi-Fi, and they would, when we were doing the social distancing, they would drop off their pet, and my wife could do the exam in the exam room while talking to the client over video while they were sitting in the car. And it didn't require any extra technology. It was just the laptop that she was already using, the client's cell phone that they already had. Everything was based on sort of the existing infrastructure, because we had decided early on that this relationship management was a core part of our philosophy, both for the clinic and for the practice management software.
Yeah. It reminds me of Quicken versus Zero. Zero was designed from the ground up for the internet. Quicken was a desktop solution, and they tried to make it internet. It didn't work.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing. Can you give me some cases, examples of the problems, and how are you solving it? I know you shared one, which is during COVID, like being able to talk to patients who's sitting in their car through video, right? Brilliant example. Any other examples that you think somebody can understand and relate to in your relationship first approach? Specifically your wife's example.
So one of the things to remember is that it's not necessarily just the relationships with your clients, because the relationships among the members of your team in the clinic are extremely important as well, right? You have to have sort of a smooth functioning team in order to manage this business. But it's also, you have to give your employees the agency and the autonomy to manage the relationships with your clients, because your clients are going to come in. They're not just going to interact with the veterinarian. They're going to interact with your receptionist, with your technicians. Everyone on the team needs to feel as though they can maintain these relationships with your clients. So, for example, we had a receptionist who was just fantastic. She's a superstar. But she told us a while back that her husband's job situation was changing, and she needed to move. So she was leaving the state. And at first we thought, well, we're going to lose her. But we started thinking, well, what if we had more communication tools built into the software? And so that was when we had already built some of these features, but we finished off the rest of the features for a complete voice over IP integrated phone system in the practice management software. And so now we have a remote receptionist, and she lives 1,000 miles away, but she's part of the team. And part of it is she had such close relationships with so many of our clients that we knew that, if she left, and I mean, I still get this when I'm working at the front desk in the clinic, people walk in and they say, oh, where's Natalie? And, they don't realize that she's been living in a different state for a while now, but she's on the phone with them all the time, and everybody remembers her, and she remembers all of them. But part of it is that the software that she's using integrates the phone with the medical records. And so as soon as somebody calls, she can see like the names of all their pets before she even picks up the phone, and she can see all their medical records. She can see all the appointments that they have and all of that stuff. Because it's all in one place, it's easy for her to sort of switch context and, pick up that relationship with whoever's calling. And so again, it goes back to that sort of asymmetric relationship thing, because when someone calls in, they get the impression that she remembers exactly who they are. And she has sort of the whole context of everything that has been said to them, even if it was an email that was sent by the doctor. All of that communication is sort of in the same place, and it's part of the medical record.
Yeah, I remember Steve Jobs said, I'm paraphrasing, like, great technology just vanishes. Just almost gets out of the way, right? This is kind of like, the more you describe it, I mean, the patients love, this lady who's answering the phone because she remembers every pet's name.
Yeah.
This dirty little secret, or the secret that the patients don't know, is she has that information in her fingertips.
Yes.
She looks like she's walking on water, right? Like, it's like, wow. Like, I mean, me and my pets and, everything about me. Like, wow, this woman is like, she cares so much. I mean, that's the way technology should be.
Yeah.
So I love
don't get me wrong. This is Natalie. Natalie is amazing. She really does. I think she probably does walk on water, right? But she also has good technology.
Yeah, exactly. And I assume that when your wife is, working at the convenience store, I mean, the grocery store, maybe one day you'll build, there'll be a technology where she'll be wearing eyeglasses and it'll know
Like,
who's in front of her. And
yeah,
here is
yeah,
shows the picture of the pets that she can see, and she can like, oh, you know, how is Merlin doing? That's the name of our
yeah,
pet, right? Like, oh, and like I saw him 2 weeks ago, and I know, is that medication working? Yeah, of course. And I'm like
yeah,
impressed out of the world.
yeah, yeah. You can imagine how, as a client,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
really does change
The
your attitude
relationship.
about the relationship with your
Yeah,
vet.
absolutely. Because I feel like she knows everything. She cares about my pet. She cares about me. She's educating me. And I also think, going back to the education, a lot of times the technical jargon is hard to understand. But imagine there's a simple video that explains things.
Yeah,
And all of a sudden I get that video along with that explanation. Hey, guy, I know I explained it to you, but in case you don't understand it, watch this 2-minute video.
yeah,
And boom,
exactly.
like that is like, wow, she went out of the way to get me on track, get me on the same page, like proactively, right? That changes the entire game.
Yeah,
And I would agree with you, Stephen. Like, I think this could be a huge problem. Like, during COVID, people couldn't travel, they couldn't do anything. So everybody bought 3 pets, right? And there's a huge demand for veterinary services. And
yeah,
now world is back to normal. People are traveling, inflation is high, money is tight. Now you have to earn your keep, exactly like it was pre-COVID, right?
yeah,
Now the practices, that are great at relationships, that are great at education, are going to have an unfair advantage in the marketplace, and the ones who are not won't. Let me ask you this. If you are talking to a new pet owner, what would you tell them? Like, let's not pet owner, veterinarian, new veterinarian, like who's just early in this and they just bought their practice. Like, what would you tell them on day one?
I would say kind of the summary of what we've been saying so far. When you're deciding which systems to invest in, when you're deciding how to think about your practice. Now, there are definitely other ways to practice medicine. And, there are certain aspects of, if you're doing, a spay and neuter specialty clinic, you're not going to be seeing a lot of repeat customers. You do still need to be able to communicate with your clients. They generally are going to understand, my dog needs to be neutered. So it's not quite the same problem, but depending on sort of where you fall on the spectrum of what kind of medicine you want to practice, you should be very intentional about how important these relationships are going to be to your business, to your medical practice, and to your personal life. I mean, this is one of the other things to remember, is that the stress, we talked about this a little bit, the stress of managing these relationships can have a long-term effect on people individually. And so you have to understand, if you see yourself ending up in a situation where you're struggling to manage these relationships, but any failures to manage these relationships are going to impact your business, going to impact the medicine that you're trying to practice, make sure you think about those things up front, and make sure you understand how these things are interconnected, and how these, there are tools out there that can help you with these things, but make sure that you simplify things as well. Don't try to buy, all the software from all the different vendors and try to patch them all together, because that's not really going to help. So, make sure you set your priorities and find the tools that most closely align with what you're really trying to accomplish.
Thank you. Last question before we wrap this up. What are some of the benefits? Can you quantify it, or can you provide some way to get our hands around the benefits of a practice that has these capabilities from a relationship standpoint, and the practice that actually takes advantage of these capabilities from a relationship standpoint?
Sure. I mean, I can start with a story. So we had a client, and keep in mind, so we bought an existing clinic. So we have clients who have been coming to the same clinic for 20 years. And it was the place where my wife was practicing before we bought it. So she had been the vet there for a while. But we had a client a few years ago now who, his cat passed away, and my wife had been taking care of his cat for most of its life. It died of old age. It had some, various medical complications, but lived a long and happy life. And when the pet passed away, this client wanted to commemorate the pet by giving us an ultrasound machine. That was an expensive piece of medical equipment, and he donated it to us because it was so important. Like the care that he had received, and he felt so connected to not just to the individuals in this practice, but it's a community, right? So he felt that he was part of a community, and the care that he had received from that, series of vets and series of people on the team was so valuable to him that he wanted to have that commemorated. And so, on our ultrasound machine, there's a little plaque with the name of his cat on it. And that sort of thing. So, I mean, it's hard to put things like that into numbers, but there are relationships like that you can build with your clients. There are also ways that you can put these things into numbers. And I forget exactly what the number is, but it's something like 80% of the increase in compliance rates when your clients feel as though they have that open channel of communication, which I see that as sort of equivalent to having a good relationship with your vet. If they believe that they can ask you questions and you can answer their questions honestly without trying to rip them off, they are significantly more likely to follow your medical advice. And again, you can think of that from a business perspective. Obviously, they're going to come back. You're going to have better retention rates. But from a medical perspective, you're going to have healthier patients because your clients are going to have they're going to have greater respect for you and greater respect for your advice, and they're going to follow your advice. And it's going to turn out better for the puppies and kittens that come into your clinic.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. I think, I mean, I do marketing. So of course, on one hand, you need new clients. On the other hand, you need to get these clients to love you, right? If they love you, it's a lifelong relationship that's, repeated 5 times over because they tell everybody and their friend about how an amazing relationship is. Like they've
Exactly.
never experienced anything like it. I mean, to a point where they're even willing to buy you expensive equipment and donate it to the office. Like that's how much they appreciate the team and the caring, right? So anyways, thank you so much, Steve. And any final thoughts before I wrap this up? How do people find you? Maybe share your website. I know we're gonna put it in the call, in the notes as well, but just feel free to share any information you are willing to.
Just come to vetbadger.com is our website. And if you want to send me an email, I'm at steven@vetbadger.com.
Thank you, Steven. That is STEPHEN at vetbadger.com. Thank you so much for joining us today and talking to us about prioritizing relationships in veterinary medicine. By the way, Steven and I are working on an event. Hopefully, we are shooting for 25th of June, but we'll share the details soon. So go to the website, Veterinary Business Institute, to learn more about it. I also want to take a moment to thank our listeners. We appreciate each and every one of you. We cannot do what we do without you. If you like the podcast, please write a review for us, share it with your friends on social media. And until we meet again with another amazing episode of the Veterinary Business Podcast, have a wonderful week ahead with your pets and your team, and of course, the pet parents.